Okay, hello and welcome everyone to the Rainbow Coaching Collective podcast. We are a collective of LGBTQIA transformative coaches who are set on empowering members of the community and its allies, one conversation at a time. Today, as always, I'm joined by my lovely co-hosts, Holly and Rach. Hi, both.
Yeah.
Hello.
And this week we are on I can't believe it, our 12th episode.
Ooh,
And we
amazing.
are exploring the theme of vulnerability, which was actually a request by one of our listeners that we cover this subject. So a great subject to cover this. Um, so we're going to start with a fairly broad question, I think, which is what has been your relationship with vulnerability?
Would you like to start, Rachel?
I can do. I'm My relationship with vulnerability I think it's been about balance and not getting the balance right. And what I mean by that is spending kind of years masking to try and fit in, both from an LGBT plus and from a neurodiversity point of view. So kind of that terms of masking and knowing it, but then that the opposite coin of going, I need to be a certain amount of vulnerability in order to connect, and knowing when it's putting myself at risk or when I'm actually, I almost want to say being vulnerable at the right amount, but in that sense of I'm not oversharing.
Mm,
um, I'm being vulnerable with the right people in the right places. So it kind of feels like vulnerability is a lot of things, and like I said, it's finding that balance of going, what's vulnerable enough in that moment in time that
mm.
protects me but also helps me to connect and be authentic. That feels quite a lot, but
That was lovely. Yeah, that's brought up a lot for me,
Mm.
Rachel. Thank you. There was so much in there. Is there anything more you wanted to add? Before I...
um, I spend a lot of time not getting it right. But at the same time, I think recently vulnerability has shown me the power of connection actually, and it's made me, especially with you guys, especially with friends out there, that I've suddenly gone, wow, it's okay. This is a space where I can be vulnerable. And actually, people then become more vulnerable with me. And I also think, from a coaching point of view, vulnerability plays a huge part within the coaching world in your relationship that you have with the
Mm.
person that you're coaching. So I think vulnerability comes up in all different areas, in all different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, that's all right. But
Amazing.
thanks for sharing that. How about you, Holly?
Yeah, such a lot in there. Thank you, Rachel. And it's really sort of spiraled my brain as well in terms of what I think of vulnerability. I agree with so much of what you've just said. Um, the first word that I wrote down was complicated. What's my relationship with it? Very complicated. Um, I think it's very much linked with honesty. So being honest with myself about my needs, my wants, and I haven't been very good at doing that in the past. In fact, I would say I was terrible at doing that in the past. So I wasn't vulnerable, but I think also, having said that it's linked with honesty, it's also linked intrinsically with fear, and the fear of being vulnerable and what will happen if we are vulnerable. And I think gosh, there's so much we could go into about like what that means within our childhood, and perhaps we would have said something to someone when we were little and then we didn't get the response we wanted, or we were bullied or made fun of, and those sorts of things put up walls. And so basically we are taught not to be vulnerable, and that was very much the case for me. So I couldn't even really say what my own needs were. And that led to a lot of undoing and unpicking and going, gosh, who am I? What are my needs? What do I want with my life? And that took undoing of the layers and discovering what was underneath. And at the bottom of all of that was my vulnerability. I also think there is huge strength in vulnerability. And I think it's really important. So now, what is my relationship like? You're absolutely right, Rachel. I think it's about being vulnerable with the right people at the right time, and knowing that I think the most important person to be vulnerable with is yourself, and it starts there. So being vulnerable with yourself, looking after yourself, being honest with yourself, and then from that point, knowing who you want to share that with. Because sadly, it doesn't always reflect in everyone that you would want it to. Some people are not there yet, and they may use your vulnerability as a bit of a weapon. And it's just knowing who to share that with, I think. But if you're strong in your own honesty and who you are and your authenticity, the less likely it is to affect you, I think, if you do feel attacked in any way. Hope that made sense.
Yeah.
Totally.
Love that. Yeah, relate to so much of what you both said there, and that idea of what you were saying, Rachel, around the masking, and what you were saying, Holly, around the messaging that we're given. We're not set up with the right conditions, really, are we? When we're kids, to be vulnerable, we're actually told to do the opposite. So it's something we have to learn. It's a muscle that we have to build. And then you both spoken about almost the scale of vulnerability. We can almost have what Brené Brown calls the shame hangover, where we share too much and then we feel awful, or we undershare and we don't build that connection that you were talking about, Rach. So it seems like a sliding scale. And I guess that's getting me thinking about how do we find the balance on that scale? And what's your journey been with trying to find that balance?
I just got some scales now that are just going up and down.
Yeah. I'm like, trial and error.
Yeah. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because even when you've done all the work and you feel like you have healthy boundaries, sometimes you just might, I don't know, perhaps overshare in a situation, and then you've got the, oh, can't believe I just said that, or you might get it wrong is not the right word, but you might share with something to a friend that is vulnerable, but you might not get the response you want. So I think it is very much, yeah, I think I thought I was sort of joking in a way saying trial and error, but it kind of is. And also knowing you won't always get it right, and knowing that's okay as well. And I think perhaps that takes me back to my point of the most important person to be vulnerable with is you. Because as long as you are open and honest with yourself and vulnerable with yourself about where you're at and what you want and need, it puts you in better stead. I don't think there's ever a right or perfect answer, but at least it will put you in better stead to deal with anything that might come up. Sorry, I've got one more point. Something that my brain's just led on to is the importance, I think, and something that's really supported me is having someone that you can trust in to speak to. And I'm thinking about, obviously the space that we offer in terms of coaching, but also if it's on a deeper level, perhaps in counselling or therapy. And so having a professional space to be vulnerable in is so intrinsic, I think, to exploring your own vulnerability safely, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Mm.
And again, it's finding that scale, isn't it? I mean, it's almost keeping yourself safe. So you almost have to know the perimeters of where your safety net is,
Mm.
because there is a bit of a gamble, a bit of a risk if you then say something to a person you can't take it back.
Mm.
You know, so that moment has changed, um,
Mm.
and like you say, we're not always met with the response that we were hoping for, which can then really take us on a different path and how we feel about ourselves.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you said earlier about meeting the vulnerability within ourselves and understanding what our needs and wants are, because a lot of the time it's easier to go, I can go and help them, or I will please them, rather than go, actually, what what do I want, what are my needs?
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something there, isn't there, around what you were saying, Holly, around self and finding a comfortability in what we're happy to share and an ownership around that. Because as you were saying, Rach, we can't ultimately control the reactions of others, but we can control what we are prepared for somebody to react to.
Mm.
And it's not an exact science. The more that we can take ownership of our own vulnerability, I guess the easier it becomes. And there's certain people that we might want to offer more of what we've owned as our vulnerability to. Like I would share a lot more with you than I would with some other people. Um, uh, but yeah, it's all about that, isn't it? Intrinsically around what we're prepared to release, and almost be the word that's coming out for me is almost validation, is almost be validated or invalidated. Um, because like you were saying, Rachel, we lose control of it as soon as we say it. We can't take it back.
Yeah.
So it's that almost validation and invalidation. And if we validated ourselves before it goes out, somebody's invalidation doesn't have the same impact on us, does it? So I guess it's like around a self-validation here as well with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
What I've just that I really resonated with that, Max, and what I kind of thought that might be helpful is to think of the why you're sharing something in that moment. Like before you do, think of why am I sharing it, and take a breath and take a beat and kind of go, yeah, perhaps why am I sharing this? Am I sharing it because I want connection? And I think if you are doing that, that's so incredible and so important to do. However, you've got to be prepared for the fact that you may not get the reaction that you want. It might trigger something in the other person. So I think it's about, if you want connection, you do need to be prepared that you can't always control the outcome. But that's not to say don't do it, obviously, but it's just being conscious of perhaps why you want to share it. Are you looking for help? Are you being vulnerable because you want support? So I think it's knowing the why, and then you can kind of think, is this the right person? And you can make an informed decision.
I
Yeah.
like that pausing to evaluate, is this actually something you really want to do, and is this the right place to do it? Yeah. What When you were talking, what came up for me was, to be vulnerable takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
But also, I think all three of us are saying it also takes a lot of compassion. And then you get connection. And so it's almost like 3 C's, but I don't know if those 3 C's necessarily go
I
in
just
that
wrote
order.
that down, yeah.
Yeah, well, can you just say the 3 C's again, right?
What came up for me was courage,
Courage,
compassion and connection, because even if we're just talking
Love
about
that.
being vulnerable with ourselves, it still takes courage to go inside. We're still wanting connection with ourselves, because if we're disconnected, then it's even harder to be connected with the outside world.
Mm.
And it's not very good for us not to be connected to ourselves. But then that compassion, because, like, you know, compassion of how we feel about ourselves, but also that compassion with whatever reaction we get.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Compassion with whatever reaction we get. Just made me think it's compassion with ourselves, being self-compassionate, but also compassionate with the other person. Maybe they're reacting in a negative way because they have their own stuff going on that means that they can't accept that thing. So it's not even about us, it's about them. And if we can look at it through the lens of self-compassion, it doesn't impact us, but also it's coming from that more loving space.
Mm.
That's a huge one, isn't it? Yeah, courage and compassion equals connection.
That's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Love
love it.
that.
I couldn't
And there's
decide
some,
which way it went, but yeah,
yeah,
that's nice.
there's something about the masking here as well that seems to be important to speak to. You spoke to at the beginning, Rach, but around that courage point. Um, for me, on my journey, I was like the opposite. So it was like a pendulum. I was didn't display any form of vulnerability about sort of 10 years ago in my legal life. And I was always trying to conform and be what everyone else wanted me to be. So I'd pretend I knew what people were talking about. They're talking about something on TV or the radio. I would just had to conform. And when I first saw somebody take off their mask and say, "Do you know what? I don't actually know what he's talking about." I was like, "Oh, wow, I'm not the only one. Thank God." And I remember coming across Brené Brown's quote around about that time, I think, where she says, "Vulnerability is the first thing I look for in you and the last thing I want you to see in me." And it hit home so
Yeah.
hard how powerful that was because I was looking everywhere for someone who was like me, but I was pretending everywhere to be everything but myself. And there's so much irony in that, but that's exactly how I was operating. So in this, there's a huge piece around the masking and actually the power of somebody else taking off their mask to enable us to show up as our full selves. And that does take that first C. You talked about courage, really, really courageous things to do, to be the first person to say, you know what, I don't know. That just came up as a really important part of this conversation, I think, for me.
Mm.
I don't know what your both your thoughts are on that.
Thank you, Max.
Yeah, thank you.
Something that's just come up for me really strongly after what you've just said, Max, is the link with coming out, having
Mm,
vulnerability. I think that's
yeah.
probably for everyone in the community one of those points where you have to be courageous, and you are at your most vulnerable because you are just opening up. And I think the way that I felt was because I hadn't been vulnerable with myself and allowed myself to recognize how I was feeling on the inside. When I did take that step and was courageous enough to do that and opened up, I felt such a wound like from doing that. And I think that's something that anyone who's ever come out can relate to, I think. So that's probably, I just kind of hadn't really thought about that before the conversation, but I think that's probably when we can be at our most vulnerable. And we continue to do it every time we come out to somebody. You know,
Mm,
first time was the hardest, but we have to be courageous, compassionate with ourselves, just to get through the day
mm,
in terms of being authentically ourselves, authentically queer. We have to do that all the time and we have to be vulnerable all the time. And to be honest with you, sometimes it's tiring
Mm.
to be that vulnerable all the time. And so I think we shouldn't also beat ourselves up if we don't want to be vulnerable on a certain day as well.
Mm. Compassion
Yeah,
again.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I totally agree with everything you've said. I think coming out is especially a time of vulnerability, um, because in my experience, it's not all been like, hey, lovely, great. It's I've had quite a lot of negativity, more so years ago, but there is that kind of fear of this one sentence could change where this path goes,
Mm.
and whether
Mm.
someone's going to go, yeah, that's fine, or that's it, I'm going to go and sit over there, or
Mm.
however they respond. But it's that kind of thing of knowing, like you say, at that point there is that courage. And sometimes I know you said about earlier, like pausing, and sometimes it's like that pause can almost say something, because if you're not queer and someone said it, you'd probably just be no. If you're not queer, or there's no need to come out, so there's no need for that pause. So if you generally are pausing, it's generally meaning something.
Mm.
So there is that almost that vulnerability at that moment, or even that beforehand when you feel actually at some point I may have to. If it's not a point where you feel I want to address it, because again it's our choice, um, but we have to put ourselves into that vulnerability space of going, what is my next step? And that can take a lot
Mm.
of courage and a lot of compassion, because sometimes we might not feel safe enough to come out.
Yeah.
In which
Mm.
case, we need that compassion in ourselves to go, not today,
Mm.
not in this space.
Mm.
Over here, yes, more than happy. Here, to me, the risks are more than the kind of authenticity is. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but if we lived in a world where we could just come out all the time, then we wouldn't be having this conversation for a start.
Yeah.
But sadly we don't. It does come with a risk of rejection on some level.
Mm. Yeah. Kind of, as you're both speaking, it kind of ties back to the topic of shame as well, doesn't it? In
Mm.
terms of
Yeah.
um, we're protecting and hiding a part of our identity because we feel like if it's revealed, there could be some judgment around that. That judgment could lead to something very physical, hopefully not, but it's possible in some spaces, right? But it could also lead to rejection just on the relationship sense. So there's a level of shaming of that part of ourselves, isn't there? Whether that's being LGBT plus, or we talked about neurodivergence, or all these parts of ourselves that we mask. There is a shame that we almost formulate around those parts because we have to think, will this fit into this space? So that we have to create that shame, um, eh, to enable us to enable us to hold ourselves back, to keep ourselves safe. It's kind of like a cycle.
Mm.
Um, as I'm hearing you both speaking, and as I'm thinking of my own experience, and yeah, and it can be tiring, can't it? I mean, I remember I never used to come out the hairdressers or the barbers that I go to, but I've started doing that recently, and it's very liberating, but it's tiring.
Mm.
And then same in the taxi. Um, you don't know how it's going to be received. The more that you do it, the easier it becomes. And actually, I think there's something in showing the brain as well that it is safe. And quite legitimately, our brains can create all these stories about rejection and judgment. And there was things that we were all talking about before we came on today around that, right? Um, and I feel like the brain can create these narratives. And so sometimes we do just need to check in, and we do just need to practice, and we do just need to try. But we could start like on a very small scale. Um, so if it's talking about, like, for me, it was my husband in a coffee shop. And then if it's not received well, I'll never go back to that coffee shop, right? Rather than doing it more extreme way, maybe with somebody at work that I feel might not be accepting or something like that. So there's a practice, I think, to the vulnerability as well, which goes back to the courage point. There is definitely a practice, and we can start small with it, and it can get easier over time. Because I never would have thought I'd be sharing the sorts of things that I share now publicly, I mean, in this podcast 10 years ago. So there's obviously a muscle that's been built there for me over time. So if I can do it, because I was right over the other end of the pendulum, then anyone else can do that as well. So, yeah.
I think that's really important. Listening to you there is actually celebrate the wins, celebrate
Yeah.
actually when the vulnerability has led to strengthening of whether it's strengthening yourself, strengthening the connections, because then it's a reminder of actually it's not always bad. Vulnerability can really be a real way forward in growth, a real connection with yourself, with others. There is a lot. I'm going to say good stuff, but that just sounds so off the cuff, and I mean it more than good stuff, but I can't find the words. But vulnerability, I guess, leads to the authenticity and genuineness. So there are wins, there are celebrations, and to celebrate them, even no matter how small.
Yeah.
I have the reframe there on the wins, right? Because it's easy to look at it through that negative slant, but there's huge wins. Why be vulnerable in the first place? Because it's what builds connection. None of us would have the friendship we do if we weren't vulnerable with each other. It's a very, very different friendship, isn't it? So yeah, it can create really beautiful things. So we could speak about this again for a very long time. I can't believe how quickly the time goes with these chats. And yeah, I'll just remind people that are listening, we don't script any of this. This is all just us thinking on the spot about these things. So it's very raw and vulnerable when we're speaking in this space as well. Do either of you have any key takeaways for people who are listening, who may be at the beginning of this journey, who feel like they've had to live a life where they've hidden away large parts of themselves to keep themselves safe, and they're now wanting to start to build a connection and go out into the world? Perhaps they're just coming to terms with the fact that they might be LGBT plus. What might the advice be that you give to them?
I think for me, it would be start with yourself in the sense of what are your needs, what are your wants, so you have an idea of what it is you're looking for, what it is where you're going. And I think, like you said earlier, Max, is start off small, and it's about, I suppose, learning to trust yourself to know actually this is the environment where I feel safe, that like-minded people, or even if it is listening to podcasts, books, it's almost like feeding on things that meets your values, that helps grow with that vulnerability. And I think journaling, so that you can kind of see that progress of, especially writing down those small wins, of also noticing what's gone well, because as humans we tend to notice what hasn't gone well far more. So I think sometimes it is journaling, letting it out. And I think for me actually is speaking up, in the sense of sometimes asking for help. It can be that vulnerability, even if it is starting small, of, I don't know, saying something to a friend to, like, I don't mean test the waters as such, but just see what level they're willing to go as well, because I think vulnerability is a two-way.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Rach. There's a gems in there.
Yeah, agree with all of that, Rachel. Ditto. And also, just what I wrote down was to explore in safe spaces. So explore what your needs, your wants are, and specifically in terms of being LGBTQ plus. What I found, I can only speak to my own experience, but what I found really helpful was going along to meetups, or book groups, or poetry classes, and it's something that kind of sparks your interest within the community, that is a safe space to be. You mentioned about reading books, Rachel. I think that's really important. And I think, sadly, it's a bit of a disappearing thing, but gay bookshops are amazing places to and be safe, because yeah, you're not sort of out, and it's nothing to do with sort of drinking or alcohol or partying. It's kind of that softer way in, I think. So it's about exploring, and you can buy a book, and they quite often have notices up as well about local meetups and things like that. Obviously, you've got the internet as well, and exploring those. But yeah, sort of being vulnerable in places that you know you're going to be received with welcome open arms.
Yeah. Love that, Holly.
Can I add just one more thing?
Yeah, go on, Rich.
Compassion.
And compassion. Yeah, let's reiterate that. That C is a very important one, a daily one for all of us.
Yeah.
I think the bookshop in London is Gay's the Word. I think that's
it. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
have I been there? That's on my bucket list. I should have been there,
Yeah.
but I know we don't do shoulds. I would love to go there.
Yeah.
When I
We'll
go there
go
next time I
there.
visit, I will go there. But yeah, if anyone's around London, that's a good one to go and visit.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks to you both for getting stuck in to the topic and sharing your stories. If you resonate with this topic or anything that we've shared today, or if you have any ideas on things you'd like us to talk about in the future, please do get in touch with us. You can visit our website, www.rainbowcoachingcollective.com, or get in touch with us via email on info@rainbowcoachingcollective.com. We'd love to hear from you. And I'd also like to share that we have our online retreat, which is on the 22nd of November, that's open to everybody. So there's more information about that on our website you can take a look at. So hopefully, if you have enjoyed these podcasts, that's something that you might consider coming along to. But until next time, thank you very much, everyone. Take care.